Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. My guest is Paul Polman, is the CEO of Unilever. Thank you so much for being with us. Your company, Unilever, sells 400 different brands, from detergents to mustard. You have been involved in sustainable development for several years. Paul Polman, you are chairman of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You are commissioner of the Global Commission for the Economy and Climate. 1,000 CEOs are gathering here at the UNESCO in Paris today to actually talk about climate change. And you wrote with someone from the UN that the impacts of climate change are a wake-up to all of us. So do CEOs have a special part to play?
Oh, absolutely. The business community is about 60% of the global GDP. It's about 80% of the financing flow nowadays and 90% of the job creation. So if we want to solve some of these major issues like climate change, which then are linked to poverty or food security or other things, business needs to be involved for different reasons. The first thing is business cannot function themselves if society doesn't function. Very difficult if an economy is poor to do business. The second thing is that business is incurring the cost of climate change. Just the last 10 years alone, 3.7 trillion in extra cost because of hurricanes, of droughts, of floodings. And business absorbs a lot of these costs. And last but not least, it's an enormous opportunity to move to a greener economy, a more sustainable economy.
Is it the new market for the world?
Oh, it's a 3 to 10 trillion market.
Said that,
absolutely,
for the US?
It's a new market. And the US obviously will play a big role, but for innovation and technology, enormous opportunity.
So what about NGOs when they say that it's about greenwashing, that actually companies won't really be involved in climate change? What do you answer to them?
Oh, I think there must be some part of that. I would not actually deny it because there are millions of companies out there. But I think what is more important now is, and a lot of NGOs are discovering that as well, there is a big enough group of CEOs who want to help make this change possible. You have 1,000 here, as you said. You have 1,000 CEOs who signed the statement on the World Bank calling for a price on carbon.
And they don't do that only for communication reasons?
No, they actually do it internally in their models because they see that. 95% of the top companies now have report on carbon, for example. The top 200 companies have internal prices of carbon. And many of them have plans much more aggressive than any of the individual countries do. So it is really happening. And what we need to try to see is that in Paris we get an ambitious enough agreement and that the change that we're talking about happens fast enough. That's really what we're talking about.
But it requires lots of investments. It requires money. It's a cost for a company to invest in durable development.
Yeah, if you look at the coming 15 years, the world needs to invest about $90 trillion in infrastructure, especially for urbanization, many more people going to move to the cities, for land use and for energy. And the $90 trillion can actually be invested smartly. If we invest it smartly, we can move to a green economy over that period of time, or a little longer, because we're talking about till about the mid of this century. And we can actually do this without spending more than we normally spend, just by spending it right. And that is what we are saying. Spending
it right, but you're talking about 10 years, 15 years, when shareholders are looking at 1 year, 6 months, 2 months for the dividends.
I'm talking about the global economy. I'm talking about the global investments that we need to make as an economy in total. Companies themselves have always been used to longer term investments. The average investment when we build a factory only pays out 5-6 years from now.
But shareholders look at the short term.
Well, but they let you invest in factories. They let you invest in training of people. They let you invest in IT systems. They often have a longer term payout. So it is not unheard of that we can invest in some of these transitions to a greener economy. The investment community is getting more and more interested. In fact, $40 trillion of invested capital is also calling for a price on carbon. They see it as a way to mitigate risk. Many of the big investment funds are getting out of investments in carbon. They see it as a risk. So the investment community is starting to be active. I mentioned the example of Tesla, of the car company. They only sell 40,000 cars a year. General Motors sells 9 million cars a year. Yet Tesla, with 40,000 cars a year, has half the market value of General Motors, which means that the financial industry is starting to take these risks of climate mitigation into account in their valuations.
You launched actually a sustainable plan for the company in 2010. Did you reach the goals you wanted to reach?
Yeah, it's a 10-year plan, and it's a fairly ambitious plan, because what we say in Unilever is to totally decouple our growth from environmental impact and to increase our social impact. What is unique about this plan is that we take the responsibility across the total value chain, from farm to fork. We're now 5 years into the plan, and we actually have made great progress. All of our factories are zero waste to landfill. We have green energy in Europe. We're rapidly going to green energy in the US. We have now 55% of our agriculturally raw materials sustainably sourced. We're setting the standards in the industry.
You are setting the standards in the industry. I mean, that's what you feel, because you don't feel alone in a big industry that uses fossil fuels with the big lobbies.
We see more and more people converting at a faster pace, but obviously what we need is the ambition to go faster, because the longer we wait, the more expensive it becomes for others.
How can you go faster?
By, for example, setting the example alone, making the commitments, doing the advocacy, working with governments, but then more importantly, actually working with industry associations. The consumer goods industry, which I represent, with a company like Unilever, products like Ben & Jerry's or Dove, or many of our Knorr, many of our other products, we have made a commitment as an industry that we will not sell anything anymore in soy, beef, palm, pulp that comes from illegal deforestation. Very important. The consumer cares about it. I care about it.
Do actually consumers change? They want greener products, but they need to pay more money for
not necessarily,
products.
because if you get to sustainable agriculture, usually the yield is higher as well. The smallholder farmer has a better income, you can employ more people, and the products are obviously made for generations to come. So it's a true win-win-win, and that's what we are showing with our business model. We are 100% sustainable on our key raw materials, and we are still a very successful going concern. And we should start asking ourselves more and more the question, not why do we do this, but why are others not doing this? Why are others polluting and have society pay for that? Why are others using resources and stealing from our future generations?
It creates jobs, it creates growth, that's what they say.
And we are now showing with the new climate economy report and in the way we do our own business models, that the time has come that you can actually transform to a more sustainable model and have a better economic model.
François Hollande and Angela Merkel actually met in Berlin, and they pledged for an ambitious deal to fight against climate change this year. What do you expect yourself from the Paris conference of this year?
Well, we were very happy that they met, and actually they said we need a clear target to get to net zero emission this century. It's very important. If the politicians in Paris say net zero emission, then the investments that business will make will accelerate, and we will have a faster transition. We also need, as a second point...
But they need an agreement, right, to be signed
They need an agreement of net zero emission or climate neutral at some point in time. The question is, what year? Is it before the end of the century? That is the agreement that needs to be reached in Paris in December. But on top of that, the industry is calling for a price on carbon. What you don't measure, you don't treasure. And we need to start measuring carbon, just like already about 30 countries do in the world, without any problem. And it needs to be ambitious enough.
So do we need actually a European price on carbon, an international price? How would it work?
Prices can be set, don't necessarily immediately need to be set global, because there is not immediately a global market either. So local, regional pricing is probably the first step to go. But the pure commitment that we price what we value will change behavior. The third thing is financing. There are countries that obviously are big emitters. They need to come down, but they also need to help finance adaptation, building resilience in the emerging markets. So climate financing is a big part. And then the last part is obviously the partnerships. Partnerships with the private sector to stimulate technology, to get rid of preferred subsidies that are still on carbon, 600–700 billion a year still.
So what do you call partnerships exactly? With the
partnerships
governments?
Would be with government, civil society, NGOs definitely, and the private sector. The Tropical Forest Alliance is a typical example of that. It's a partnership where the consumer goods industry goes together and say, we don't want to sell anymore from illegal deforestation. But you still have to work with countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, or others to help make these transformations. So you need the World Bank.
Indonesia wants growth. Maybe it doesn't really care about climate change.
That's why, well, if all the trees are cut, then there is no growth anymore. not only for Indonesia, but also for us. There's no palm oil anymore. So you need to do it sustainably. You need to help them, you need to finance. So we need the World Bank, we need other countries, and that's are the type of coalitions that we are putting together to make this a successful transition.
What about the Green Fund, which is supposed to help poor countries to finance this transition? Only got, what, 10 billion?
Yeah,
Needs
10 billion.
100 billion?
Yeah. Well, 10 billion is a start.
How can it find $100 billion?
Well, you know, there's enough money around in the world right now. We just need to put it to good use. And the 10 billion is a good start. So what often...
It's just a start, right?
Yeah, but what is good is if you work together with the private sector, together with the governments, you actually can get what they call catalytic funding. And normally the factors of scaling up is 5 to 10. So you have 10 billion here right now, which hopefully will grow over time. But the 10 billion here can actually create investments from the private sector anywhere between 50 and 100 billion. And you can start to see the impacts if you start doing that.
You met Pope Francis, as Ban Ki-moon did, the UN Secretary General, to talk about climate change. What did you exchange about? What is he going to do, Pope Francis, about
Well, we were there this
change?
morning, and as you probably know, he's going to issue an encyclical. And climate change is especially affecting the poor. When weather patterns change, which are costing us now, over the last 10 years alone, $2.7 trillion, we are resilient here. We have an anecdote. But when a hurricane hits the Philippines, when droughts hit Africa, you get severe issues of poverty, you get starvation, you get food security issues. So climate change in itself is not a separate issue. It's actually a development issue. And what the Pope is obviously looking for is an inclusive world. What business also understands is a world where too many people are excluded or not participating is obviously not a world that is in balance, will not be a world that is successful. Countries that don't function will also be very difficult for business to be successful. So climate change mitigation is very much a development agenda. And what is obviously important with the Pope and the 1.2 billion Catholics that are in the world, but I would say also other religions, that is a moral obligation that we have, a moral obligation to just not take care of ourselves, but also to work for the common good and our fellow citizens. It's only when we live in harmony with Mother Earth and with our fellow citizens that we will all benefit for the long term.
There's a momentum in 2015. Thank you very much, Paul Polman.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to you for watching, and stay tuned on France 24.